Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.
There's a storm across the valley, the clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Welcome to Community Forum. Today is March 22nd, 2024, and I'm your host, Priscilla Almquist-Olsen, and I'd like to welcome you to the show and welcome to your representative in the House, Massachusetts House, Carol Doherty. Carol, it's a pleasure to see you again.
It's always a pleasure to see you, Priscilla, whether it is here at ECAT or somewhere in the community. I enjoy chatting with you, meeting with you, seeing you. So thank you for inviting me here.
Yeah. Wow. Now that is a superlative compliment. I haven't heard that in a long time. Thank you for that, Carol. Okay, so Carol, you have been a very busy beaver, working night and day, and I know that there are many, many House bills that come before you and House bills that you originate and draft yourself. Where do you want to start?
Well, it's hard to know where to start. I guess this is the, so first of all, I am the state representative for the 3rd Bristol District, Taunton and Easton. And my representation of Easton has grown from when I was first elected to 2.5 precincts for a 5 and 6. And I'm very proud to represent Easton and 2/3 of Taunton. So it's a third, the district is a third Easton and 2/3 of Taunton. So that's very, and Easton is a very important aspect of the community. And when you can imagine that Taunton, which is a very urban area, and Easton, which is not urban, is a good contrast for me and allows me to have a full understanding of the various aspects of the wants and needs of people in the Commonwealth as represented just here in the 3rd Bristol District. So that's a long answer to your question, which I didn't answer. Where do I want to start? The breadth of legislation that comes on every session, and the sessions are 2 years long. This is the second year of this 193rd session. And the breadth of legislation is extraordinary. You think of anything, whether it is conservation or environmental or education, healthcare, housing, and it goes on like that, it's just overwhelming. There are several thousands of pieces of legislation that are filed annually. They're filed both by legislators at the behest of people in the district. They are bills that are also filed. So Priscilla, for example, if you had an idea that you thought should be legislated, some aspect of what we do here in the Commonwealth that you believe should become law, then you might reach out to me and say, I'd like you to file this legislation. I might not think that it's a particularly good idea, but it is my obligation to file that legislation in your behalf. So almost no matter what it is, obviously it has to pass muster in terms of good taste, I'm imagining, but that my obligation is that not only will I file a legislation, but that I would file legislation on your behalf as well.
Oh my, I didn't know that.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. And do most of the legislators follow that general principle?
They do, and those pieces of legislation that come before me that are filed for someone in somebody else's district, I mean, I've become aware of that. I don't really have a keen sense of how many pieces of legislation that come directly from the citizen, from the constituent, but it is my responsibility, and you're right. So it is truly a democracy here in Massachusetts.
Wow.
Yeah, we'd like to think that.
Yes.
And for my own part, when I first entered the legislature, I filed maybe 8 or 9 pieces of legislation in this session, I have 18 pieces of legislation that have been filed. That a few of them, a handful of them, are refiles. So I filed it last time. They didn't pass muster. They didn't get over the line. And so I felt keenly that that change of law, and I'll give you an example in just a moment, was important to the Commonwealth. And so I have refiled it. The one that occurs to me immediately has to do with the mental health of students in our schools. And this piece of legislation says that mental health days should be treated like days that are physical health days as well, that we should make no distinction between the needs of a student around his or her mental well-being at a given moment and if they have the flu or a bad cold. And so that is my legislation that's making its way through the process at the moment.
Well, your, shall we say, your background as a school teacher for many, many years, and your presidency of the Massachusetts Association of Teachers, or am I getting that title correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So you have led teachers, you've been a teacher, you've participated in the public school system, and so that, to your credit, you are very sensitive to what the needs are. And I'm sure that many of your former colleagues have also spoken to you about certain needs that they feel are important to become legislation so that their students will benefit from that legislation. And also, I'm sure there are teacher needs too that come before you, and you're sensitive to those things, and that's wonderful because you have a very deep understanding from your own personal experience.
I think that what compelled me to run for the legislative seat had been my experience on the Taunton School Committee for five elections, so 10 years on the Taunton School Committee. And that experience brought me very close to the wants and needs of children, of course, in our school system and their families as well. And so I had a keen sense of where the gaps were in our systems, particularly in the system of education, but also in human services as well. Children come to school with a wide array of interests and different families and different needs. And so those issues have stayed with me throughout my entire experience on the Taunton School Board, but also I carry those issues with me to the legislature. So while I have 3 or 4 bills that were filed that are education bills, there are other bills that are filed that are in the best interests of working families as well. And I champion a lot of legislation that is filed by others that help to support families and children and working people here in the Commonwealth.
So you are a co-sponsor on quite a number of bills.
Quite a number of bills. It's hard to say no when it's something that I consider to be meaningful and important to the Commonwealth. I have to say that co-sponsoring helps to support the legislator who has filed that bill, and they feel keenly about it if it's something that I believe in. It also says to the committee chairs where those bills are being heard that those are important to people in the legislature. It is quite a transparent process. Anyone can go and look for a bill number and look to see who has sponsored that bill. And very often I get messages from people who say, thank you very much for your support and co-sponsorship of Bill X or Y. And so that activity is very important to us as legislators, makes us feel that it's not just an idea that we have or that advocates that we are in connection with have, but it is an idea that is shared by, hopefully anyway, many, if not the majority of legislators. I'm not sure that that action helps to carry that bill over the line to final enactment. When I first came to the legislature, I was really surprised that it takes many sessions sometimes for specific pieces of legislation to get over the line and to be enacted into law. I think the ordinary person might believe that one proposes a piece of legislation and that it is heard by the committee. A public is invited to give their input to that particular piece of legislation, yay or nay on that, and that it is then debated and deliberated by the broader committee and it gets passed or not. Well, no. I think about the legislative process and enacting legislation as a serpentine process. It has peaks and valleys, and it's kind of twists and turns because there are many stops along the way. Once a committee hears a bill, it makes a recommendation to move it forward. It can be have a favorable recommendation or a not favorable recommendation. It could be sent to study, which is like the graveyard for bills. It can be appended to another like bill that's also being heard by a committee. And then that all, if it's a favorable recommendation or it gets appended, it gets sent to Ways and Means, for example, or it might get sent to another committee that is more focused on that particular topic. So it's a very interesting process. And when something finally gets over the line and it's on the way to the governor's desk, it is a moment for cheering. When you just kind of conceptualize the huge numbers, thousands literally, of bills that are filed, you wouldn't want several thousand changes in the law on an every other year basis. You want your legislators to think carefully about what they're doing, to reach out to communities who are parties of interest in legislation. You want to have those conversations about, if I'm doing something about schools, to talk with the superintendent, to meet with school committee members, to talk with teachers and other school personnel, to see what they think about the legislation that might affect their lives and the lives of the children in our schools before I make a decision. It's not, sometimes that decision is not a popular one, but nonetheless, after doing all of that analysis, I think that it's not like off the top of my head. It's a decision that's made based on a lot of input from people about that. So.
It's interesting you should say that because my father was chairman of the Board of Selectmen here in Easton in the 1950s and early 60s. And that was his philosophy, that when a need arises or a proposal is given, you reach out to not just the community, but also to those people who are affected, by the possible legislation. And my dad would say, well, when you have all of those facts and opinions laden on the table, you then evaluate them all, but you do so with the best interests of the residents of Easton at heart. That's always the guiding principle. So you're following in that tradition, and that is the democratic principle, because you are a person representing the people. Therefore, the people have to give you their opinions. You have to get the facts that maybe you don't know. No one person can know everything and have an opinion. So I applaud you for that, because there are a lot of politicians, quote unquote, who don't follow that rule. They feel that they are the beginning and end of all judgment. And so we're very pleased to hear that, Carol, that you're not.
Well, and it is, there are some very controversial pieces of legislation and activities that are going on in the Commonwealth. And sometimes, even after all of that research, it's not, my gut tells me that in the long run, the decision that I need to make that may be contrary to some of the people who have given input is different, but that I need to go with what I believe is in the long-term best interests of the Commonwealth. People will call and say, I don't like the way you voted. I don't like what you did. And I will always return the email or return the call and say, thank you for your input. I appreciate that very much. And we are not so very far apart on our opinions about this. However, and then explain what it is that I felt keenly about in terms of that piece of legislation. I think that first and most importantly, people are appreciative regardless of where we might sit on an issue, how far apart we might be on an issue, that their legislator, their state representative, has the respect for their opinion that, in this case, me, would respond to them to say thank you, but we couldn't agree on this point. I think that it's very important to stay connected to the people that I hear from and to people in the district in other ways. There are social events, celebratory events, veterans events that I get invited to either attend or participate or speak at, and it is something I really enjoy doing, is being out in the community. So, I mean, I enjoy the emails when I am able to get to them and read them all, and inevitably do. You know, it's so interesting in an email, you have hundreds of emails, right? And so you spend an hour and you might eliminate 10 or 20 of them, and you can hear those new emails coming in and dropping down to take the place of those that you've basically thought you've taken off your list. So, but keep those cards and letters coming. It's really important to me to be able to weigh what the opinion of our constituents are and to make a decision.
So I imagine when you're invited to different events or you go to them, that people do come up and say, by the way, have you thought about this? I seriously think this is an issue that the legislature should take up. And I imagine even though sometimes it's a social event, isn't it true that you do have people who take advantage of your presence? And
well, and I think you're absolutely right, Priscilla. And it might be the only opportunity for that constituent to see me somewhere. My phone, of course, my phone number is, or at least the phone number of the office at the State House, is published on the legislative website. So all of that information is there for the person to reach out, email address as well. But actually seeing someone in person to say, oh, I didn't know that was you. Oh, is that really you? Are you the state representative, really? So it is a great pleasure for me to meet someone. We do a lot of constituent support. There are phone calls always for help with unemployment insurance, with getting your passport. That's more of a federal issue, but we create the pathway to the congressman's office so that a person can get what they want done. We really are the conduit through which that need passes to accomplish in a positive way. And you don't always see the faces of the person that you talk with on the phone. And I, from time to time, will be at an event and someone will say, oh, I'm Kathy so-and-so, and thank you so much. Hugs all around for helping me with my whatever it might be. And it's such a pleasure for me to have someone recognize me and say thank you for doing something. I would not have known that they were in this particular location. So it's a great pleasure, because that is a lot of the work that we do when we're not in chamber, we're not voting on something. We are in the district, participating in activities, as I pointed out, or doing constituent work to help to support something that needs to be done.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder to everyone. You know, if you do have a challenge and you've been trying to solve the issue, don't wait. Call Carol's office and she'll help you with that, because she and her staff have resources that you, as an individual, probably don't have, and she can share those with you. So do take advantage of that. So you know, federal issues too, because as you say, you have the conduit. Now, my representative, U.S. rep, is Stephen
Lynch. Steve Lynch?
Lynch.
Congressman Lynch, yeah.
Right.
It was Congressman Almquist-Olsen, and then we got redistricted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, and his office is always very responsive too. So, Carol, the election, you're up for re-election in November, and what are some of the goals that you have set for yourself, and there's particular issues that you want to concentrate on?
Well, my mantra, if you will, since I decided that I was going to pursue the state rep seat has always been to work to support children and families and working persons in the Commonwealth. And so my focus has always been in that direction, whether it's helping to increase our resources available to construct housing. The governor has proposed a $40 billion housing bond bill, which, if you take a look at it, multiple pages, it is all kinds of housing initiatives that need to take place here in the Commonwealth. We have a paucity of housing here. So health care, making sure that everyone has access to health care in an affordable way. Education, making sure that our schools are adequately funded. There is a big difference between, as I pointed out earlier, Easton and Taunton in terms of, for example, with education, Taunton very much comes into benefit from the Student Opportunity Act, which was designed originally, still is, to help to support urban areas that did not have enough resources to provide the quality education we know our children so desperately and sorely need. In Easton relies almost totally on its property tax in order to help to support whatever your community budget is. And so my focus, in part, for the coming session, if I am reelected, and I certainly plan to be, that I want to join the chorus of voices that are saying the Student Opportunity Act is a wonderful, wonderful phenomenon here in the Commonwealth, and those urban areas need those resources. But areas like the school systems, like Easton, also need resources. And so Connor Reed is an extraordinary town administrator. He, at budget time, provides me and Senator Timilty, Rep. Cassidy, with information that is very important for us to have in hand as we make a plea for more resources for our schools, for example. And so my plan is to continue along that pathway. I have an outside section of the budget that I'm filing along with a colleague of mine, Adam Scanlon, who represents North Attleboro, and they suffer from the same kind of funding, what do I want to say, inequity for schools. So we are filing, with the support of the School Committees Association, an outside section of the budget, which we can do, that will form a working group that's going to look at the way in which we provide Chapter 70 funds so that places like Easton and some 200 other districts like Easton across the Commonwealth will get their fair share of that funding. And it's not that they're, for example, a minimum student aid, and this is very complicated, education funding is very complicated, is proposed at $30 a student. It will probably end up being $60 a student, but to Easton, that represents an additional $100,000, which is not, in my opinion, adequate to do all of the things that you want to do here. And so this long-term, it's going to be a long-term process. Should this amendment be passed, it will be a long-term process looking at how we can improve the funding sources for Easton schools and districts like ours, and what is it that we need to do to make those positive changes without interrupting the Student Opportunity Act at the same time. So it's a real balance, and with limited resources, we anticipate. So we have a downturn in anticipated resources, and so the budget process, which we are in the middle of, is one that will define what the next year is going to look like for the Commonwealth going forward. So things like housing and healthcare and maternal well-being and all of those things that make a quality of life for people in the Commonwealth are enacted. So I want to focus on those aspects of legislation that are helping legislation that are going to help people and to move them along. Yeah.
So you're always considering what the needs of your constituents are, and the government, the ruling bodies. Now, you have a select board in Taunton. We have a select board here in Easton, and we have many committees and agencies and commissions, all with their own needs put forth. So the process of prioritizing the needs, especially at the state level, must be daunting, because there are so many needs that compete with each other in importance. How do you do that balancing act?
So it is on a continuum rather than a hierarchy, I think, because all of the things that we know support the quality of life of the people in the Commonwealth are all equally treated equally in my mind. We have to give attention to, I mean, we have a housing crisis here in the Commonwealth. There's absolutely no question about it. So passing that housing bond bill is really critical to mitigating that housing crisis. We have a migrant crisis, as we well know, and it's growing. And people in the Commonwealth are concerned about the distribution of resources to both people in the Commonwealth and to address the migrant crisis as well. And so that has to be looked at. We will hopefully will enact a universal school meals and fund that fully once again. And so and I see universal school meals as, if you have 4 or 5 children that you're sending to school and you're expected to pay for their meals, it's a pretty big piece of change for a family to pay for school meals. And so in this past year, those school meals have been with no cost to anyone, to any of the children. And we intend to continue to fund that at a high level. We're looking at a better way of funding and providing access to early education and care. The sooner little guys get to school, the more advantage they have in developing well in their lives as they grow, the better their success is. And so focusing on early education and care is really important. So, you know, you see everything. We need more houses. We need full access to health care. We need universal school meals. We need more education funding in those places where there may be gaps. We need to look closely at our system of government across all of those issues in a way that says this must work for everyone. And we as legislators are responsible for doing what we can in order for the system to work for everyone. So it's very complex. As I said earlier, it's very serpentine.
Well, and I know that when you pass a bill in the House, or actually before you do, when does it go to the Joint Committee? Is it after you pass it in the House, then it goes to the Joint Committee, and the Senate bill has passed, so then the 2 bills come together in this Joint Committee of House and Senate representatives?
So the joint committees are really the first stop. So after legislation is filed, it gets sorted out by the clerk's office and distributed to the joint committee. So it might be Joint Committee on Housing or Joint Committee on Education.
Yes.
And then
it gets referred out from the Joint Committee to the House and the Senate.
So it comes to, so the House will rule on a bill. It gets sent to the Senate, and they do whatever it is they're going to do, mostly change some aspects of what the House sends over, and then a conference committee, and that's what you're referring to.
Okay.
So the conference committee is theoretically joint, so there are 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate who come together and work out the differences between the House and the Senate. And sometimes that process takes months and months and months. We may not see a bill emerge, and if it doesn't emerge, so the end of the session is the end of July. And if stuff doesn't come out of those the many conference committees, because we send legislation over to the Senate and they act on it and it sits in a conference committee, and they're not idle, they are deliberating over what that one single piece of legislation ought to look like. But if all of those bills don't get addressed by July 31st, then it's the end of the session. And you start all over again in January.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, that's what we say. That's why it takes someone might say, oh, this has only been filed for 5 sessions, 10 years. And to me, filing a bill today and having it take 10 years to get finally passed into law, if it does that, but let us say theoretically it gets passed into law, whatever that might be, things change in a decade or two. So what you intend, what you say about an issue here now will become, I believe, very different.
Right.
10 or 20 years from now.
So are amendments put on those bills?
I'm sorry, say again.
Then are amendments put on those bills to reflect the changes that have occurred over time?
Almost every bill that comes before us to be voted on, amendments are allowed. So we just, the House just adopted a supplemental budget at the request of the governor. And so there is a small window of opportunity presented to us where we can file amendments. If we know that that bill is coming along, you can anticipate what amendment you're going to want to, because you've had a chance to look at the bill. And I might look at the bill along with others and say, no, this doesn't adequately address X. And so I might decide to file an amendment that addresses X. So there's those opportunities to do
so
that.
Carol, we have maybe 30 seconds left here. Tell me, tell the viewers why they should re-elect you to the House of Representatives.
Well, if you've listened carefully to what I say, my heart and soul is in my district. My perspective is to do what I am able to do as a single legislator to support the constituents in the 3rd Bristol District. And I'll always listen to what you have to say. And always return your phone call. Try to get to your email in a timely way. But by all means, pick up the phone and let me know what's on your mind.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you. Carol Doherty, running in November to represent Taunton and 1/3 of Easton. We thank you so much for filling in all the gaps for our viewers. You're doing a magnificent job, and we all appreciate it. In continued success and good luck in November. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. I hope to come back.
I know you'll come back.
Thank you.
And you know you're always welcome. Priscilla Almquist-Olsen bidding you farewell. And until next time, be well.
Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.